Hi everyone. Today I'm going to be solving the legal problem product of array except self. So first let's read the question. Given an integer array nums, we want to return an array answer such that each element of answer is equal to the product of all the elements of nums except for the element at the same index. And some other constraints are that our algorithm or solution must run in O of n time, and we can't use the division operator. So let's do an example. Let's look at example 1. So here, the nums array is an array of 1, 2, 3, 4. And so in our output array, for the first element at index 0, its value is going to be the product of all the elements in the nums array, except for the element at index 0. So its value is going to be like 2 times 3 times 4, which is 24. The second element in the output array, the element at index 1, its value is going to have, so it's going to be the product of the elements in the nums array, except for the element which is at index 1. So its value is going to be 1 times 3 times 4, which is 12. The third element of the output array, the element at index 2, is going to be the product of all the elements in the nums array except for the element at index 2. So its value is going to be 1 times 2 times 4, which is 8. And finally, the fourth element in the output array, with the element at the third index, its value is going to be the product of all the elements in the nums array except for the element at the third index. So its value is going to be 1 times 2 times 3. And here we have some constraints for the input. And here we have a follow-up. So in the follow-up, it asks, can we solve the problem in O of 1 extra space complexity? And it mentions that the output array does not count as extra space complexity for space complexity analysis. So my solution, the one I'll be going over, will also cover the follow-up. So how we're going to solve this problem is, first, we're going to be using a prefix and suffix variable. So so the prefix variable, I'll call this p, is going to be set to 1. And the suffix variable, which I'll call s, is also going to be initialized to 1. And we have a res. This will be our output array. Res is our output array. And what we're going to do is this. We're going to have two for loops. So, or two loops. In the first loop, it's going to be called the forward loop. And this is because we're going to be looping from the first element to the last. And at each element, we're going to do two things. First, we're going to be appending the current prefix value to res. So in like Python code, it will look like something like this. And the second thing what we're going to do is we're going to update our prefix value by multiplying it with the value of the current element this should be in nums. Yeah, so we're going to update our prefix value by multiplying it with the current element that we're at. So it's going to look something like this. And this element is the same thing as this one. And basically what this prefix variable is going to do, it's going to basically be the product of all the elements that came before the current element. So for example, if you're at like index I, for example, like let's say you're at index I, then prefix at the beginning of the loop, the prefix variable is going to be the product of all the elements in nums from index 0 to index I minus 1. So like the first element to the ith element, basically. And so that's the first loop. In the second loop, we're going to do something very similar, but this time we're going backwards. So this is the backwards loop. And the reason why I say it's backwards is because we start at the last element this time and go to the first element. And again, so at each element in nums, again, we're going to be looping through nums. And for each element that we come across, we're going to do two things. First, we're going to be updating the resume by multiplying. Sorry, we're going to be updating the res array by multiplying the element at the current index with our suffix variable. So yeah, so basically, like what we're going to be doing is like, so for like each element that we encounter in nums, and I guess in this case we also will need like the index, but basically like at that index and at the same index in res, we're going to be multiplying it with this by the suffix variable. And the second thing we're going to do is we're going to update the suffix variable by multiplying it with the element. And so basically what the suffix variable is going to do is it's going to become it's going to store the product of all the elements that come after the current element. So again, right, like let's say you're at index I, then at the beginning of the loop, the suffix variable is going to be equal to the product of the elements from index I plus 1 to the last index. And finally, like we will just return the resume. So let me do a quick example. So let me change the thickness a bit. So here, let's use example 1. So nums is 1, 2, 3, 4. So I'll say, so N stands for nums. P stands for the prefix, is initialized to 1. S stands for suffix, is initialized to 1. And res, this is a result or output array. And at the beginning, it's empty array. So let me do this. So in our forward loop, let's call this forward. So at step 1, so here we are 1, right? So at the beginning of the loop, we're going to update the resume. So by once you update the resume, basically we're going to append the prefix value to it. And now we're going to update the prefix value by multiplying itself with the current element we're at, which is 1. So 1 times 1 is still 1. So the prefix value is still 1. Step 2. The element we're at, sorry, the element is the 2. We're going to append the prefix value to the resume. So it's gonna res is going to look like this. And we're going to update the prefix variable by multiplying itself with the current element. So one time, so p equals to 1. The prefix variable equals to 1 right now, and the current element is 2. So 1 times 2 is 2. So the prefix value changes to 2. And the third step, the element we are currently at is 3. And at the beginning of the loop, we're going to update or append the prefix value to the resume. So this is what we have. And we're going to update the prefix value by multiplying itself with the current element that we're at. So 2 times 3 is 6. So this is going to be 6. And finally, the fourth step, the element that we're at is 4. And at the beginning of the loop, we're going to be multiplying, so we're going to be updating the resume by appending the prefix value. So this is what we'll get. And again, we're going to be updating the prefix variable by multiplying itself with the current element. So like 6 times 4 is 24, so this will be 24. So this is the first for loop done. And if you look, right, what we have in a res array is basically the product. So for each element in the res array, that element's like that element is basically the product of all the elements in the num array that came before like the same index. So for example, like here, right, at the zeroth index, because zeroth index is the first value, which is set to 1. Here, right, in the first index 1, basically is like the product of all the elements in the nums array that came before index 1. So it will just be 1. At index 2, its value is the product of the elements in the nums array that came before index 2. So it will be 1 times 2, which is 2. And similarly for index 3, right, it will be 1 times 2 times 3. So that's the forward loop. Now let me move this a bit so I can do the backwards loop. So this will be the backwards loop. And keep in mind, our res array is this. So, except in the first step, we're looking at like the last element in the nums array, right? Because we're going backwards. So it's 4. The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to update. I'll just do -1. Actually, yeah. So we're going to be updating the last element in the res array by multiplying itself with a suffix value. So this will create the res array. So the suffix value is still 1. So this will basically have no effect on the res array. And then we're going to update this suffix value by multiplying it with the current element that we're at. So suffix is 1. Suffix previously was 1, and the current element is 4. So 1 times 4 is 4. In the second step, we look at the second last element in the nums array. And so again, right, so we're going to be updating the second last element in the res array by multiplying that element with suffix. So now suffix is 4, right? And so this will make it so that the res array looks like this. So so this will be 8. Sorry, yeah. The suffix is 4. The current element we're at is 2. 2 times 4 is 8. 6. And we're going to be updating this suffix variable by multiplying itself with the current element. So 4 times 3 is 12. Suffix becomes 12. In the third step, we're going to be looking at the third last element in the nums array, which is 2. Oops. Yep. And again, so we're going to be updating the third last element in res. Again, we're going to be multiplying it by this suffix value. So the third last element in res is 1, and suffix is 12. So our res now is going to look like this. I'm going to be updating the suffix variable by multiplying itself. By multiplying itself with the element that we're currently on. So 12 times 2 is 24. So the suffix is now 24. And finally, at step 4, we're going to be looking at the fourth last element in the nums array, which is 1. And we'll be updating the fourth last. My bad. This should be -3. My bad. So. Also here. So let me do this. So this should be -3, and this should be -4. Right. So the fourth last element in res is 1, and suffix is 24. So now res will look like this. And again, we're going to update the suffix variable by multiplying itself with the element that we're at. So 24 times 1 is still 24. And that's it. And we just return this, which is what we saw in the answer here, 24, 12, 8, 6. So now let me code this up. So as I mentioned before, we're going to need a prefix value, and it's set to 1. we're gonna need a suffix value, and it's set to 1, and we're gonna need a output array, which is just less. And here, this is a for loop. Oops, nums. We're appending the prefix value to the res array, and now we're going to be updating the prefix value by multiplying it itself with the current element that we're at. And that's like the forward loop. Now we're going to do the backwards loop. The backwards loop is a bit trickier just because we're iterating backwards now, but this is it's not too bad, and this is how you iterate backwards in Python, at least in for loop wise. So now we're going to be updating the respective so we're going to be updating the element at the current index in the res array by multiplying itself with a suffix value, and we're going to be updating the suffix value by multiplying itself with a element in nums at the current index. And finally, we just return the res output array, which is res. So let's run this. And yep, you can see we get a solution that we want, and let's submit this. Yep, and you can see this is a valid solution. And yeah, this solution, it uses all of one space complexity, just because we just have like these three variables, or these two variables and this output array. But no question, it says that the output array does not count as actual space. It doesn't like these two variables. It doesn't matter like how many numbers there are in nums. It's gonna be like we're gonna use those two variables regardless. So that's why the space complexity is O of 1. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you found it useful.